Hello, this is Terrence McNally. Welcome to Freeform, a world that just might work. This is not a normal hour episode. I had earlier posted what follows as the final 15 minutes of my recent show with Facebook co-founder Chris Hughes. Folks suggest that I post it on its own as a shorter than usual episode, and so here it is. A couple of weeks ago, I recorded myself reading a speech I originally gave June 9th, 1989, 36 years ago, at my 20th college reunion, Harvard class of 1969. Ours was the year of the University Hall takeover and the campus strike. In '89, I was fully involved in the entertainment industry. As an actor, I was a recurring character on the nighttime soap Knots Landing, and as a writer and producer, my film, Earth Girls Are Easy, was actually playing in Harvard Square that week. In the speech, I asked how we were living up to our youthful ideals, and I've often said I don't know if my words affected anyone else, but I came back home and got much more involved in causes, setting me on the path on which I found this show 7 years later. Today I find my words prescient. So much of what concerned me then has gotten worse, showing up in new media and new social and political forms that we could only imagine. I also find my words hopeful and, given today's reality, a bit tragic. Thank you for this opportunity. This is my first reunion. I'm glad to be here. I spent the last couple of years at Harvard and the first couple afterwards teaching and counseling chronic schizophrenics and Boston area school kids from Lincoln to Roxbury. And at some point I decided to leave that work because I didn't want to spend the rest of my life creatively responding to people's problems. Looking back now, I realize that's all we can ever hope to do. For an independent study in 1969 on Marshall McLuhan, I wrote a paper in which I put forth the notion that the entertainment and image industries might be our only hope, referring to the establishment as the system. I called us the revolution, and I felt there was no way we could ever compete with them on their terms, and perhaps we could outcreate them. Samuel Goldwyn said some years ago, if you want to send a message, use Western Union. Preston Sturgis, self-questioning director in Sullivan's Travels, eventually learns that laughter is a worthy contribution. And much of what I've created is comedy, some of it satire. And I try to do all my work, whatever the material, in front of or behind the camera, with some essence of quality, which I hope communicates itself. But I now found myself connected, committed really, to an industry which I feel is the prime culprit in our society's addiction to distraction. I could recite for you a lot of Harper's Index facts and figures about things like the greenhouse effect and depletion of the ozone layer. The bottom line for me is that our species, and perhaps the entire life force, seems to be committing gradual global suicide. Their sense is constantly barraged by stimuli, by messages, images, facts, excuses, temptations. People are numbed. In the classic addictive model, they distract themselves to deny their experience and their condition. Politics, education, religion, or the arts might once have equipped us to deal with our current moral, social, environmental crisis. But USA Today, Entertainment Tonight, Action News, tabloids, sound bites intentionally trivialize, sensationalize, and package our best impulses. The last presidential election campaign seemed more a long-running TV show than an actual referendum on the leaders and policies of this powerful nation. For years in entertainment, there have been, in essence, two industries. There are the actual products, plays, films, radio, television. There's also a side industry which consists of personalities, gossip, trivia, scandal. Now as media replaces community, everything is show business. Attention is focused more on the celebrity than on the beliefs or actions of public figures. As a global tribe, I believe we have some very serious work to do. I want to use this moment to share with you a vision that I've seldom been able to fit into my music videos, movie scripts, or characters I play on primetime TV. I had been off campus teaching the day of the takeover of University Hall in '69. When I arrived in the yard and heard what had happened, there was no question in my mind what I would do. Although I hadn't had a hand in removing the deans, I immediately went inside to stand with those who did. I slept that night under a table on one of the upper floors, and just before dawn, the buzz went through the building that they were coming. We all massed down in the central room on the main floor and waited. I tied my long hair back, got a bandana ready to protect me from tear gas, and joined arms with those around me. The campus press actually ran a photo of me taken at about that moment, and I looked scared shitless. The police arrived in their powder blue uniforms with jodhpurs, high black boots, and shiny helmets. I knew we were engaged in civil disobedience. I assumed we would go limp and let ourselves be arrested and let out. I'll never forget looking over my shoulder as the rear doors opened and troopers came in swinging 3-foot-long billy clubs. I'll never forget the screams of my fellow students or the sounds of those clubs smashing heads. Turning away, I saw that it was possible to get out of that room, into an office, and jump a floor and a half to the ground. I jumped. I've thought often over the years about that choice, what it meant that I was there and that I jumped rather than get beaten for what I believed. But today, the central truth of our situation is there's no window for us to jump out of. I think we're in a unique moment in human history, in the history of this planet. It seems we have until recently been able to move in a constant progression of growth and acceleration. The only limits might be the limits of human imagination. The truth we must now face is that we live on a physically finite planet. Our production and consumption of goods is outstripping the Earth's ability to replenish our resources or absorb our waste. Our place in the universe has changed. There have been other such moments, the discoveries of Galileo and Copernicus, for example, but we cannot afford the luxury of years of resistance before gradual acceptance of the new truth. Another event unique to this time is a positive one. Spurred on by the threat of nuclear destruction and by the emergence of instant communications in global markets, we are now seeing an end to the Cold War. We face not merely an immense crisis, but also an immense opportunity. Never before has it been as necessary to look at life in the long term, and yet I think never before have we shared as short a view. In the past, when the extended family seemed to have more permanence and more resonance, when we were less mobile, when neighborhoods and towns seemed to last, even when the captains of industry dominated whole industries with family-owned companies, I suspect that our culture took a longer view. Now the locus of decision-making, where values come from, is no longer in family or religion or in nature. Values seem now to come from business. Our whole society seems infected with the kind of thinking born of an overpowering fixation on short-term profits, quarterly dividends, year-end statements. There is lag time between the changes in our actions and the corresponding changes in the global environment. But we cannot wait to find out the exact ramifications of the greenhouse effect or of ozone depletion. Based on the possibility and probabilities of catastrophe, we have got to begin now to change the way we think, the way we make decisions, the way we live. As Soviets and Chinese move to adopt market capitalism, we see the emergence of a single global economic model. Free enterprise has proven to be the most successful mechanism for harnessing human energy toward innovation and productivity, and yet there is something terribly wrong. Not with the concept of capitalism, but with our bookkeeping. The true costs of goods and products, the environmental cost, the social cost, the cost and quality of life, are nowhere reflected in current economics. Only when real costs are taken into account will the market impulse truly serve us and our planet. We also need to value true productivity and reverse the pervasive trend to reward speculation and money manipulation out of all proportion to the human benefits they create. We can no longer act as adversary nations or adversary alliances. We cannot look at the immense debt of poorer nations as their problem. The U.S. practice of restricting the distribution of environmentally unsafe or toxic substances within our borders and then freely dumping these same goods in other markets can no longer be tolerated. We are all in this together. I imagine it sounds as if I'm focused primarily on environmental issues. And I must admit that is the perspective that most calls for the radical shifts in culture that I feel are essential to our survival. Yet the same solutions, long-term thinking, accurate cost accounting, are just as necessary to deal with our deteriorating infrastructure, healthcare systems, the emergence of permanent urban underclass, drugs, AIDS, you name it. When we take the long view, our priorities change. Security is no longer national security, but rather global security. And security is no longer solely military. Education, preventive and prenatal health care, research, energy conservation emerge as top priorities. So-called primitive peoples of our land knew that we do not inherit the earth from our parents, we borrow it from our children. Last night at the buffet in the tent in Radcliffe Yard, there were alumni from perhaps 1919 to 1989. And late in the evening, I looked up and found that everyone had left except the 4 tables of the class of '69. And that showed me that our shared experiences forged a bond between us that still exists. We were part of a unique moment, not just at Harvard, but also in American history. Our contribution has been minimized by revisionists, but we and others like us caused the U.S. to resign from a war that was wrong, and we forced a criminal president to resign from office. We had 3 basic virtues that empowered us to act as we did. We had faith and hope. There was purpose to our actions. We believed we could actually achieve things that had never before been possible. We believed we could change the world. And we had love. As angry and passionate as we were, we also acted out of love for the innocents on both sides who were dying in Vietnam, for the poor and the minorities in this country, for ourselves, and for ideals that we felt were being shamed and ignored. We need these same virtues now. One reason people don't face what's happening is that they lack the faith or the hope that we can save ourselves. I think a lot of people secretly believe we're already doomed. So they cocoon themselves around their home computers and their VCRs, blind to the environmental crisis and the explosive inequities of our society. We must again generate the faith and the hope and the love of our children and our grandchildren, of our planet and of life itself. It will take that energy to begin to direct our own evolution, to shift our culture and our values, and ultimately to save ourselves. People have asked me which environmental area I'm most concerned about: endangered species, greenhouse gases, toxic wastes. I answer the area of human consciousness. It is in our culture and in our values that the greatest change must take place. I don't yet have a lot of specific suggestions on how to do that. I believe, however, that such change is an absolute necessity and that it is going to take the best minds of our generation in the service of deep passion and dedication. I want to challenge our class, myself included. Do we have it in us to take this on? I don't want to seem glib, but I don't believe we can depend on those 10 years older or those 10 years younger to lead us. I am confident, however, that we can challenge those 10 years older and we can inspire those 10 years younger. We've done it before. And I ask, if not us, then who? And if not now, when? Let us come together again in 5 years and in 20 and 25 and know that we have done everything in our power to leave the world better than we found it. Thank you. For other episodes and to join me in pursuit of a world that just might work, go to terrencemcnally.net, TERRENCEMCNALLY, all one word, terrencemcnally.net, or aworldthatjustmightwork.com. They're the same website. If you want to receive my weekly email announcements telling you who's going to be on, what we're going to talk about, and links to probably 10 or 15 articles, timely, relevant, fleshing out the conversation, sign up at my site or email me at TEMcNally, TEMCNALLY, at mac.com. You can also subscribe and listen to the Freeform podcast at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, most major podcast sites. And you'll find years of podcasts at my site or at those other podcast sites. Listen anytime, anywhere. Archives include Michael Lewis, Naomi Klein, Robert Reich, Van Jones, Bill McKibben, Connie Rice, Tom Hartman, Doris Kearns Goodwin, George Packer. You can also follow me on Twitter at McNally Terrence. Thanks to Kiana Williams in production. And most of all to you, my listeners. Please share this podcast widely.